My husband showed off the $200,000 car he bought for his mistress. I left him with nothing. This already feels so much better, she said, surveying our progress. It's like the house is breathing again. That's the plan, I replied with a smile. No more traces of him. Greg spared no expense, ordering the most extravagant dishes and a bottle of wine, so expensive it made my stomach churn. The restaurant's ambience was as over-the-top as Greg's performance. Dim lighting, soft piano music, and waitstaff who moved with practiced elegance. He was in his element, smiling charmingly at everyone, playing the perfect husband. "You deserve the best, Holly," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "To us?" "To us," I echoed, clinking my glass against his, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. I took a sip, wondering how he could sit across from me and lie so effortlessly. The audacity was almost impressive. Halfway through the meal, Greg's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, before slipping it back into his pocket. "Work never stops, huh?" he said with a chuckle, as if I didn't know exactly who was texting him. "Busy as always," I replied, masking my disdain with a practiced smile. "You work so hard, Greg." He leaned back, looking smug. "It's all for us, babe." I forced a laugh. "Of course." As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate souffle that Greg insisted was perfect for the occasion, I excused myself to the restroom. In the privacy of the stall, I checked my phone. The repossession team had sent confirmation. Everything was in place. When I returned to the table, Greg was texting under the table, his face lit with excitement. He didn't even notice me sit down. "Big plans tonight?" I asked sweetly, watching him nearly choke on his wine. He recovered quickly. "Just wrapping up some work stuff. You know how it is?" "Oh, I do," I said, my tone laced with something just sharp enough to make him glance at me. But he shrugged it off, already confident in his lies. After dinner, Greg suggested a walk outside, claiming the night air would be refreshing. I agreed, knowing full well what he was planning. As we stepped outside, he checked his watch, his eyes scanning the parking lot. "It's such a beautiful night," he said, reaching for my hand. "Let's take a quick detour before heading home. I've got something special to show you." "Lead the way," I said, keeping my tone light. Greg's stride was confident as he guided me toward the far corner of the lot. I spotted the car immediately, a sleek, shiny luxury vehicle that stood out even in the dim lighting. He stopped next to it, his grin wide, and reached into his pocket, pulling out a key fob. "Well, what do you think?" he asked, holding the keys aloft like a magician revealing his trick. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "Is it for me?" Greg laughed, shaking his head. "Not quite, babe. It's for someone very special." Before he could elaborate, headlights cut through the darkness, and a tow truck rolled into the lot. Greg's grin faltered as the truck stopped directly in front of the car. "What the—" he started, but I stepped forward, cutting him off. "Ah, right on time," I said brightly, waving to the driver. "Thank you for coming." Greg turned to me, confusion morphing into panic. "Holly, what's going on?" "Oh, this—" I gestured to the tow truck as the driver stepped out. "It turns out, Greg, there's a little issue with this car. Seems it was purchased fraudulently. With our money, no less." His face went pale. "Holly, this isn't—" I held up a hand. "Save it, Greg. I've already spoken to the dealership, the bank, and the fraud investigators. This car isn't yours anymore." The repossession team moved quickly, securing the vehicle and preparing to tow it away. Greg sputtered, his charm entirely replaced by desperation. "You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "No, Greg," I interrupted, my voice calm but cutting. "It's exactly what it looks like. You betrayed me, lied to me, and used our savings to impress your little side piece. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Holly, let's talk about this. We can fix it." "Fix it?" I laughed bitterly. "You've already broken everything, Greg. This is your mess, and now you get to deal with the consequences." The tow truck pulled away, the car, and Greg's grand plans for Melanie, disappearing into the night. He stood there, staring after it, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Happy anniversary, Greg," I said, turning to walk away. "Enjoy the rest of your night." I didn't look back. Greg ordered the finest wine, the most extravagant dishes, and even arranged for a pianist to play our song. It would have been romantic if I didn't already know the truth. As he sipped his wine, Greg's phone buzzed. His face lit up for a moment before he quickly masked it. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "Just a work thing," he replied, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Nothing to worry about." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. I knew exactly what the message said. Melanie was waiting for her surprise. After dinner, Greg suggested a walk. "It's such a beautiful night," he said, slipping his arm around my shoulders. I played along, letting him guide me back to the car. Ever the gentleman, he opened the passenger door for me, but I could see the excitement brimming in his eyes. He was counting down the minutes until he could ditch me and deliver his grand gesture to Melanie. Once we were home, Greg couldn't hide his impatience. He checked his watch repeatedly, his foot tapping against the floor. Finally, he stood, attempting a casual tone. "I've got to run out for a bit. Work emergency. On our anniversary?" I tilted my head, pretending to be concerned. "It won't take long," he assured me. "Just something I need to handle." I smiled sweetly. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." As soon as he left, I leaned back on the couch, my heart pounding with anticipation. I could picture it so clearly. Greg pulling up to Melanie's place, keys in hand, ready to bask in her adoration, until the repossession team arrived. I didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Ruiz. Repossession complete. Everything went as planned. Relief and satisfaction washed over me. Greg had no idea that his perfect little scheme had just unraveled. This time, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. When Greg returned later that night, his face was flushed and his usual swagger was missing. He slammed the door, tossed his keys onto the counter, and muttered a curse under his breath. "Rough night?" I asked, glancing up from the book I'd been pretending to read. He shot me a sharp look before forcing a neutral expression. "Just some unexpected complications. Anything I can help with?" I asked, my voice dripping with fake concern. "No," he snapped, then quickly softened. "I mean, it's fine. Nothing you need to worry about." I bit back a smirk, letting the silence stretch between us. Watching Greg squirm was almost too satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Greg pacing in the kitchen. He was on the phone, his voice low but tense. "I don't care what it takes," he hissed. "Just fix it. She's furious, and I can't." He stopped mid-sentence when he noticed me standing in the doorway. "Morning," I said casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Morning," he replied, forcing a smile. "Just handling some work stuff? Sounds stressful," I said, taking a sip. "Anything I should know about?" "No," he said quickly. "Nothing you need to worry about." For the rest of the day, Greg was unusually quiet, spending hours on his laptop and muttering under his breath. I could see the cracks in his composure growing deeper. He was unraveling, and I was savoring every moment. That evening, I overheard a particularly heated phone call. Greg was pacing in the living room, his voice strained. "I told you I'd fix it," he said sharply. "Just give me a little more time. It's not my fault. These things happen." I leaned against the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll through my phone while listening closely. "She's overreacting," Greg muttered. "You don't need to make this a big deal. I'll sort it out." The call ended abruptly, and Greg threw his phone onto the couch, muttering a string of curses. "Everything okay?" I asked, stepping into the living room with practiced innocence. He looked up startled, then forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just work stuff. Must be tough," I said, sitting across from him. "But you always manage, don't you?" Greg didn't answer, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. I let the silence linger, knowing the walls of his lies were closing in. He thought he was in control, but the truth was already catching up to him, and there was no way out. Greg stormed out, leaving me in the quiet house that, for once, felt like mine again. The stack of signed divorce papers sat neatly on the entryway table, a tangible reminder of the freedom I had reclaimed. His parting pleas, desperate and hollow, echoed faintly in my mind, but they no longer held any power over me. For the first time in years, I felt unshackled, ready to move forward. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy or oppressive. Instead, it carried a sense of peace and possibility. Sitting at the kitchen table, I stared at the papers for a moment before letting out a long breath. Greg's betrayal, his lies, his arrogance, it was all behind me now. And what lay ahead was a future that, for once, I could shape entirely on my own terms. The next morning, I sat across from Clara, my lawyer, as she reviewed the final steps of the divorce process. She flipped through her notes, her efficiency a welcome contrast to Greg's chaos. With the evidence we've gathered, fraud, misuse of joint funds, the dealership's cooperation, it's a solid case, she said, her tone confident. The house, your savings, and any untouched assets will remain yours. Greg doesn't have much room to argue, especially with the criminal charges pending. And the fraud investigation? I asked, my voice steady. That's progressing quickly, she replied. Detective Ruiz is building an airtight case. It's only a matter of time before Greg is officially charged. Honestly, he's in over his head. Hearing it said aloud brought a strange sense of closure. Greg had spent years building a facade, controlling our finances and my life. But now, all of it, the lies, the manipulation, the recklessness, was crumbling around him. I poured my energy into transforming the house. The stale remnants of Greg's presence were replaced with choices that reflected me. The heavy, drab curtains were swapped for airy ones in soft colors. The living room walls, once painted in shades Greg had chosen, were redone in a serene blue, my favorite color. Every change felt like reclaiming a part of myself. Amanda came over one weekend with paint rollers and a bottle of wine in hand. Together, we worked until the living room was a vibrant expression of freedom. This already feels so much better, she said, surveying our progress. It's like the house is breathing again. That's the plan, I replied with a smile. No more traces of him. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people Greg had subtly pushed out of my life, claiming they weren't a good influence. One evening, I hosted a small dinner party with Amanda and a few close friends. As laughter filled the house and the scent of home-cooked food wafted through the air, I realized how much I'd missed this, being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, not the carefully curated version Greg had tried to mold. Detective Ruiz called regularly with updates on the fraud investigation. Each call was a reminder that Greg's tangled web of deceit was unraveling. The dealership and bank have provided everything we need, Ruiz said during one call. Greg's attempts to deny the charges are futile at this point. He's facing significant consequences. Hanging up, I felt a deep sense of validation. Greg had spent years underestimating me, convinced his charm and schemes would always shield him. But now his actions had caught up to him. He was the architect of his own downfall. Weeks turned into a peaceful routine. The house, once a symbol of Greg's control, had become a sanctuary. One morning, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee, the sun warming my face. Opening a notebook, I began jotting down plans for the future. At the top of the page, I wrote, things I've always wanted to do. The list grew quickly. Travel to places Greg had dismissed as impractical. Take up painting again, a passion I'd set aside to accommodate his schedule. Reconnect with people who brought joy into my life. Every item on that list felt like a small victory, a reminder that my life was now entirely my own. Redecorate the house, travel to Greece, start my own business, spend more time with friends and family. Each item on my list was a step toward reclaiming the life I had allowed to be overshadowed by Greg's selfishness for far too long. It was time to focus on what truly mattered me. Starting with the house, Amanda and I transformed it into something warm, inviting, and unapologetically mine. Vibrant colors replaced dull neutrals. The furniture Greg had insisted on was swapped for pieces that spoke to my own style, and his old home office became an art studio filled with light and inspiration. This feels like you, Amanda said as we hung a bold painting on the living room wall. It's like the house finally matches the person living in it. I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. It's a work in progress, but it's getting there. With the house finally reflecting my personality, I turned to rebuilding my career, a passion Greg had always minimized. I reached out to old colleagues, shared my story, and found myself overwhelmed by their encouragement. Within weeks, I had multiple opportunities. When a former boss offered me a consulting position on a project I cared about deeply, I didn't hesitate. "We'd love to have you back," she said warmly. "Thank you," I replied, the words heavy with meaning. "I'm ready." The more I embraced this new chapter, the more I began to notice changes in myself. Confidence replaced doubt, strength silenced fear, and the limits Greg had imposed on my life seemed laughable now. For the first time in years, I was free to make decisions, free to dream, and free to live on my own terms. One evening, as I enjoyed a quiet moment with a glass of wine, Detective Ruiz called. "The fraud investigation is complete," he said. "Greg's been formally charged, and the case is moving to court in a few months." Though I'd expected this news, it still hit me hard. Not out of sympathy for Greg, but because it signaled the final unraveling of a life I had once believed in. "Thank you," I told Ruiz sincerely. "I couldn't have done this without your guidance." "Justice takes time," he replied, "but it's worth it." Later that night, I sat on the back porch, gazing up at the stars. The closure I had longed for was finally within reach. Relief mingled with satisfaction, and a tinge of sadness for the life I'd thought I'd have. Amanda visited the next day, her infectious energy lighting up the house as she placed a bag of takeout on the counter. "You look different," she said, studying me. "Like a weight's been lifted." "Maybe it has," I admitted, smiling. "The charges against Greg are moving forward, and the divorce is almost finalized. I can finally breathe." Amanda raised her glass in a toast. To the next chapter. In the weeks that followed, I started crossing items off my list. I booked a solo trip to Greece, something Greg had always dismissed as frivolous. Just the thought of walking along sunlit beaches and exploring ancient ruins filled me with anticipation. At the same time, I poured my energy into consulting, rediscovering a passion Greg had once stifled. Every decision, every step forward was a reminder that I controlled my future. One afternoon, I stood in my redecorated living room, now bathed in sunlight and alive with color. My eyes landed on a photo on the mantle, a picture of Amanda and me from years ago, before Greg ever entered my life. Looking at it, I saw a version of myself I had thought was gone, but she wasn't. The strong, capable woman I'd always been had been there all along, waiting for me to remember. Greg hadn't taken that from me, no matter how hard he'd tried. And now I was finally ready to move forward, without looking back. And that's the story of how Holly turned the tables on a husband who thought he could get away with betrayal. From quiet planning to a bold execution, she proved that patience, strength, and a little determination can rebuild a life that someone else tried to destroy. In the end, Holly didn't just survive. She thrived, reclaiming her independence and rediscovering her own happiness. What do you think about her journey? Was her approach the ultimate form of justice? Or would you have handled it differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more gripping tales of karma and justice from Reddit cheating stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.